Welcome to Salon Talks. I am Mary Elizabeth Williams, and our guest today is going to make you angry, and that is a good thing. Carrie Goldberg is the founder and owner of the Brooklyn victims' rights law firm, C.A. Goldberg, PLLC. I have to tell you, I don't know what that means, but you can tell I didn't go to law school, but you can explain it to me. She's also now the author of a brand new book. It's got a heady title, Nobody's Victim, Fighting Psychos, Stalkers, Pervs, and Trolls. That's just kind of the tip of the iceberg, though, right?
Well, it was supposed to be fighting assholes, psychos, stalkers, and pervs, but unlike here where I can say assholes, my publisher thought I should maybe be a little bit more conservative.
That maybe you wouldn't get it on the tables.
Well, yeah, and it also has to do with the online bookstore rankings and what they recommend and stuff. And
but there are so many F-word books. Couldn't you just put an asterisk, like a well-placed asterisk?
Well,
maybe.
I mean, maybe.
But it's harder it's easier with the F word than with assholes to do a well-placed.
And I did get my revenge because I did get assholery published in the New York Times for the first time ever when they did the book review. So
that is a little place in history. And as someone who has a whole chapter devoted to Godwin's Law, you must really care about having that little place in the lexicon, right? So take that, Mike Godwin.
It's a victory.
You've got your own semantic victory as well. So aside from all of that, let's talk about the book, let's talk about the law firm, and then we can even get into the next stage, the TV show that's in development. All of this sprang from, this topic is very personal to you. You have very intimate experience with psychos, trolls, and stalkers. Talk a little bit about where you were in your life when you reached this moment of change and found your vocation.
So I would say that I'm kind of an originally involuntary expert in psychos, and I've been working with traumatized victims since I first graduated from college. I was working with Holocaust survivors for about 5 years, and then I went and got my law degree at night, and was working with tenants who were losing their homes, and then with elderly people who were being exploited and needed guardianships. And I was a lawyer already at that time. And in 2013, I had recently ended a marriage very amicably, and I was kind of swept off my feet in this whirlwind relationship with somebody, and it kind of very quickly went from being oh my God, I met somebody who's just so obsessed with me, to it becoming really frightening. And it was like, oh, I've met somebody who's actually, obsessively obsessed with me. And when I ended the relationship because of the kind of frightening things that were happening during it, he made it very clear through hundreds of texts and emails that he was going to be devoting the rest of his life to destroying mine. And this was a short relationship. And he sent lots of threats saying that he'd hired people to rape me. He would send me emails and say that he'd blind copied professional contacts and colleagues, and then he would cut and paste naked pictures of me into it. He filed false police reports saying that I was engaged in some sort of corruption with judges. At the time I was doing guardianship law, and all my judges were these middle-aged women, and I was doing things like, advocating for end-of-life decision-making. So it's not exactly really ripe for a big, juicy corruption scandal. But my life was completely overturned. I moved out of my apartment, which I loved. My ex-husband had to take care of my dog because it wasn't safe for me to have a tiny dog and to be walking it in the neighborhood. I was working at a different location of my job because I was so scared. Oh, I was so scared. And then I was just getting constant threats, and my family members also were. And so when I went to the police to report the harassment, they told me there wasn't anything they could do immediately, and I should go to family court instead. But when I went to family court, the judge told me that I had a First Amendment problem. He said that, I had asked, I'd like a stay-away order, not just to prevent him from contacting and being around me, but I also want him not to post these images and contact these people and do these things on the web. And judge was just like, it's his First Amendment right. And that was a real eureka moment for me, learning that this guy, like, has the freedom of speech to express himself through my genitals, or like through pictures of me. And it was true that there was no law protecting me from a lot of this behavior. And so after that, after the criminal charges against me were dropped and he pled guilty and I got my restraining order, my life was so just unrecognizable, and I'd lost I no longer feared the same things I used to fear, because I had been living in actual fear of safety. And I just had this moment of just, I don't know if it was courage or arrogance or something, but I quit my job and I decided that I was going to become the lawyer that I'd needed, because I couldn't find people to help me, people who were familiar with sort of this psychotic, scorched earth, jilted ex type of behavior.
Which is astonishing. And it's astonishing that in 2013, that was I mean, it goes on, it continues, but the fact that the internet is not a new thing. And psycho exes and stalking is definitely not a new thing. And yet, so often what happens when someone is the victim of this type of behavior is they try to approach the justice system, and it's as if this is a completely new concept and we have no idea. We've never really figured out how to manage this before. And that is, I think, one of the things that if you don't know that when you read this book, it's so important to understand that, because what happened to you can happen to anyone who just happens to, you don't even have to meet the wrong person, but I want to start with that because you now see the red flags. You know what they are. You start very early in the book talking about a client, and you were able to sort of figure out who might be behind her harassment because you recognized some of the signs, and some of the signs of someone who probably wouldn't be predisposed to that. So nothing is perfect, but if you were to say to somebody, when you meet someone and you start a relationship or you go out on a date, here are some things that you should look for right away, and GTFO as fast as possible.
Well, first of all, so I think that there are some tips that I want to talk about, but I think for anybody who misses red flags, it's like it's not your fault. I
Absolutely.
mean, it's completely the fault of whoever the crazy psycho stalker pervert troll is. I mean,
and you don't have to have any interaction with someone for them to go wild on you. That's important too.
But what I found is that the most dangerous people, the kind of serial stalkers, are people who seem really charming and seem really, really focused on you. And a lot of my clients, they meet the offender on online dating apps, and they have a lot of really intense communications before they ever meet in person. And as a result, the client is pre-inclined to have, to be really excited when they finally meet, and will kind of silence red flags that they might just physically feel. Just like those, sometimes if you just meet somebody at a bar for the first time, it evokes a feeling of our alert systems will tell us if somebody's not quite right. But if you already have decided that somebody's right, somebody's safe, you've already told them a lot of your secrets, and they've told you theirs, and there's already that kind of emotional intensity, you're going to shut down your own alert system. And so I think that, and it's a manipulative tactic, this kind of oversharing and this kind of manipulation to get somebody to share as much secret information before a meeting, because that's kind of how it works. And so, and then the relationships usually have patterns. There's really quick intensity, immediate jealousy, demands for total attention and total time, and usually then there's gaslighting, there's accusations that you're still seeing somebody that from a past relationship, and then in some of our cases then tech gets involved, where our offender will install key logging software, or they'll install GPS onto a victim's car. And there's a lot of stalking that happens during a relationship, and hacking during the relationship, like in the case of Francesca, who you mentioned, whose ex had actually been impersonating other guys and then sending her, like in one case he was impersonating a guy that she'd gone out on a couple dates with way before they'd ever met, and created a fake online profile and then posted naked pictures of Francesca onto it, and so he was creating all these dramatics and issues that she had to then deal with, and that she went to him for emotional consolation,
right?
Which then strengthened their bond even more.
It's evil genius.
It is.
It's really it's just pure evil, and yet also the sort of thinking that is extremely sophisticated, and that's how these people do this and continue to perpetrate this against multiple victims. And what happens next for a lot of people, whether it's this kind of situation or whether it's a completely different situation of stalking or online harassment or sending around photos, whatever it may be, is you point out again and again and again, and this is important to acknowledge, that there can be very, very serious consequences for the victims in coming forward and in trying to, not in just having it out there and then in trying to pursue justice. People get teenage girls getting cut from the team, getting asked to leave their school, having employers contacted with years later. And I want to talk about this. I want to talk about the fact that this kind of behavior, so often the victims continue to be punished again by a system that does not protect them.
Yeah.
So let's talk about, you're a student, you're a high school student, you're a teenager. You should be absolutely protected, and then something happens to you. You've seen, more than once you've had this happen. You've seen this with your clientele.
Yeah, it's by far the saddest cases are the ones where the victims are young, and the institutions, which in all these cases are schools, the institutions that are supposed to protect them. When my client comes forward about a sexual assault that they experienced by a peer, or even in some cases at school, the victim, have gotten suspended, or in one case gotten kicked off the cheerleading team. But one of my most upsetting cases that people are like, but what's the other side of the story? Where's the missing fact? Is a situation of a client of mine in Brooklyn who, sweetest girl in the world, her best friend was her brother. She was really socially awkward. She had an IQ of 71. She was, and a history of communication delays, well documented. And she was at school, she was 15, and she was kind of coaxed into a stairwell by a group of 7 people. And she was then led to a stairwell and forced to give oral sex to 2 of the boys while the other 5 looked on, or some of them guarded the doors. She then told the guidance counselor, who escalated it to the vice principal, and one thing led to another, and our client was suspended for having consensual sex on school grounds. There's no version of those facts where it could have been consensual. She wasn't old enough. Some of the boys were already 18. She wasn't old enough to consent. She was so outnumbered. She didn't have the capacity to consent, and yet, so it's hard to understand that. And then even in the process, when you're suspended, then there's kind of this school court, And she had these lovely NYU students who ultimately referred the case to us, who were explaining to the prosecutor, the school prosecutor, saying, okay, but let's talk about Title IX. There was never an investigation. Like, our client's the victim. She's not a perpetrator. And they were coaxing her to just plead guilty to the charges. And they said no, and they hired us. And ultimately, it was discovered that there had been a previous incident under the same administrators in that same stairwell a few years prior.
Yeah. This is happening now.
It's happening.
These things are happening now in schools all over the country and in businesses and in homes where someone is victimized and harassed and then continues to be and then goes and looks for some kind of justice and instead winds up being punished. And winds up being punished.
And so the process can become just as traumatizing as the underlying act. And so there are all these layers of just pain and injury. And it's just unbelievably disorienting and confusing, and you can't make sense of it as a kid when like you're not believed.
Yeah, and again, then it's not just about kids; it's about adults who then have these photographs or evidence or straight up lies and fake information sent to their employers, sent to their families, and then there's just again, I want to talk about this: what happens then when it's a free speech issue and the platforms are not held accountable. That is so astonishing and terrifying. And this does not, I want to say, does not affect just women, because one of the biggest cases you talk about, the client was a man, and this was something that happened on Grindr.
Right. So our client was impersonated on Grindr by his ex-boyfriend, who created online dating profiles with our client's picture, and then would set up sex dates with strangers as if he were our client and give them the address and the geolocation information to our client's home and to his job. He worked at a restaurant as a server. And then people would come, as many as 23 people came in a single day to his home to have sex with him. And the offender, through direct messages and through the profile would indicate that our client had rape fantasies, or that if he turned them away, that was just part of the act. And so he was setting our client up to be raped.
Yeah. And this is a thing you say this is not an isolated incident. This kind of behavior also happens often.
Yeah, and it happens with impersonating like Craigslist ads, saying that somebody's a prostitute and then giving their home address. It happens, with creating like racist online profiles and setting people up to be targeted by mobs of harassers. But so often, dating apps are abused and weaponized by offenders.
And where's the accountability? That's the question: is where then is the accountability on these apps or on these platforms? And that's something that we're trying to figure out, right?
Well, there's a federal law that tried there's a federal law that was passed in 1996 that has been bloated over the years to basically shield online companies from any liability when it comes to harms to their users. And so when in Matthew's case, the Grindr case that we just talked about, he went to Grindr 50 times. He went to the cops like 12 or 14 times. They told him to just handle it like a man.
Right.
Men get a different kind of bias.
Right.
And he got a restraining order. He did everything right. And when he came to me, I was like, there's only one entity that can help you at this point. By then, he'd had over 1,000 people come to his home and job. It was like his life was just
right.
A shell of. Can you imagine, like, one or two dozen times a day, someone is like live. This is not an online crime.
Right.
This is, a tech device was used to facilitate a very offline crime. These people were coming in real life. Matthew wasn't even a Grindr user at the time. So can you imagine just like having strangers come to your home and to your job? like to have sex with you, and have to say over and over again, actually, no, I didn't send you, and say, no, I mean, I really didn't. Like, this isn't part of it.
And hope that that person is not violent, and hope that that person doesn't escalate it.
And there were several times, like Matthew's roommate was attacked once, and they would be lurking in the stairwells. They would be waiting for him when he was walking his dog. They followed him into the restroom at the when he was serving brunch to customers. There were a lot of emergency situations, and so. I finally said, we've got to get Grindr involved, like legally here, when they were ignoring his pleas for help. So we got an order against them, demanding that they exclude this user. And they then told us in court, on the record, that they didn't have the technology. Mind you, they own the patent to the geolocating technology that's very sophisticated. They said they don't have the technology to identify and exclude abusive users. So we said, well, then you've designed a defective product, because it's an arithmetic certainty that if you have a dating app that's facilitating offline encounters, that from time to time, it's going to be abused by rapists, by predators, by stalkers. And so if you created that product and let it enter the stream of commerce without just the most basic ways to control it and protect your users who you're making money from, I mean, that's your whole source of revenue, to protect your clients, then you've designed a defective product, and we're going to sue the fucking bejesus out of you. And so we used product liability theories, because we thought, okay, well, we're not suing them for anything that Matthew's abuser said, which would have Grindr would have had immunity under the Communications Decency Act for third-party content. We're suing you for your own goddamn shitty product. And my co-counsel Tor and I thought this was like a brilliant solution to getting around this the Communications Decency Act, and it was a legal theory that hadn't been tried, and. The judge thought we were full of shit and dismissed all of our complaints at a very early stage, basically saying Matthew has no right in court. Meanwhile, the visitors are still coming. It's a current emergency situation. We're not suing for something that happened, 2 years ago. Like we're needing immediate relief, and so we appealed it to the Second Circuit, and lost again. And just last week on August 9th. We filed, or August 7th, we filed a writ of certiorari to the Supreme Court of the United States, and now giving them the opportunity to rule on what is an incredibly timely and important and dangerous law.
This is about accountability on multiple levels, and I want anyone who reads this book, and I want everyone to read this book, and I sure want my daughters to read this book. This is about abuse that takes place and fighting it on an individual level and a systemic level. And that is so important, and that's what your message is about, that's what this book is about, and that's what all of us as individuals and as voting active citizens need to know about. Carrie, I want everybody to read this book, because you can also learn so much about Me Too and your involvement in that, and your personal involvement in the Weinstein case. That's a whole other story. Come back and talk about that. Can we do that?
There's a lot of ground to cover.
Can we talk about that as well?
Yeah.
Okay. Carrie, thank you so much. The book, once again, is called Nobody's Victim, and you are nobody's victim.
Nope, and none of you are either.
Fighting psychos, stalkers, pervs, and trolls. Keep up the good fight, Carrie.
Thank you so much for having me.